The boy had always lived a quiet life. His home was small, and everything in it showed how hard his family worked just to make ends meet. The walls were thin, the furniture was old, and nothing ever felt new, but he never complained. He had grown used to this kind of life. What mattered to him the most was something his family could not afford, but something his heart kept reaching for every single day. A piano dot. He did not know when this love started. Maybe it was the first time he heard a soft tune coming from the community hall near his home. Or maybe it was when he saw someone sitting in front of a grand instrument, touching each key as if it were part of their soul. Whatever the reason, something in him woke up when he heard music. Something warm, something bright, something that made him forget how hard life was. Every afternoon, after finishing his chores, he would walk to the hall and sit on the steps outside. There was a big window through which the sound of the piano traveled. He would sit there quietly, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes half closed, just listening. The melodies carried him to places he had never seen. Sometimes he imagined himself playing, his fingers moving across the keys with ease, like the people inside. One day, he found an empty cardboard box near a shop. He picked it up, cleaned it, and cut it into long strips. He used a marker to draw keys on them, trying to make them look just like the piano he saw in the hall. It did not look perfect, but to him, it felt like magic. Every night, when his family slept, he placed the cardboard on the kitchen table and practiced softly, pressing the fake keys. He memorized songs by listening, humming, and tapping. His mother sometimes woke up and saw the light from the kitchen, but she never stopped him. She just smiled quietly, understanding his dream even if she did not know how to help him reach it. Weeks passed, then months. His love for music only grew stronger. During weekends, the community hall was open for small events, and he always stood near the door. Sometimes someone would leave the door slightly open, and he would peek inside. He studied everything carefully: how a player sat, how their fingers curved, how they moved their hands when the music grew louder and softer. He learned just by watching. People in the neighborhood often saw him walking alone, humming to himself, tapping on his legs as if playing an invisible instrument. Some kids laughed at him, saying he was strange. But he never argued. He simply kept walking, his dreams stronger than their words. One evening, while walking past the hall, he noticed a poster being put up. It was colorful and bright, with big letters saying that a small-town talent competition would be held in 2 weeks. The event welcomed singers, dancers, musicians, and anyone who wanted to show their gifts. As soon as he read it, his heart began to thump. He stood there for a long moment, reading the poster again and again, as if the words might disappear. He wanted to join. The thought scared him, but it also filled him with excitement. He had never played on a real piano, not even once. But the idea of finally touching real keys, even for a few minutes, felt like a dream worth chasing. That night, he told his mother about the competition. She looked at him with gentle eyes. She knew how much he loved music, and though she could not promise anything, she placed her hand softly on his shoulder and told him to follow his heart. Her words gave him a small push, just enough to believe that maybe he had a chance. The next morning, he walked to the registration desk at the community hall. There were many kids standing in line, some wearing neat clothes, others holding their instruments proudly. He stood among them quietly, nervously holding the little slip of paper they had given him. When it was his turn, the person writing the names asked what his talent was. He hesitated for a moment, then said he wanted to play the piano. The person looked surprised, probably because he did not look like someone who had ever played one. But they wrote his name anyway. When he walked out of the hall, his hands were shaking. He knew others would come prepared, with practice and real instruments. He, on the other hand, only had his cardboard piano. But he also had something else, something no one could see. He had heart, patience, and the ability to turn his quiet nights into small moments of learning. Over the next 2 weeks, he practiced even more. His cardboard keyboard became softer at the edges from constant use. He read-drew the faint lines, making the keys clear again. Sometimes he pretended he was on stage, hearing the sound of clapping, even though the kitchen was silent. He focused on timing, rhythm, and emotion, imagining how each note would sound on a real instrument. During the last few days before the competition, he could hardly sleep. His mind kept replaying the scene of him walking on stage. He felt nervous, unsure, and excited all at once. But whenever fear tried to take over, he reminded himself that even if he did not win, he would at least get the chance to play on a real piano, something he had waited for his entire life. The morning of the event finally arrived. The sky was clear, with a warm sunlight that made everything look brighter. He wore the cleanest clothes he had, which were simple but neat. His mother had ironed his shirt the night before and wished him luck with a warm hug. He carried no instrument with him, no special bag, no shiny shoes, only his quiet determination. When he reached the hall, the crowd had already gathered. Kids were tuning their guitars, warming up their voices, or stretching for dance performances. He walked past them calmly, avoiding the curious stares. Some parents whispered to each other, wondering what the boy without an instrument planned to perform. But he kept his head down and found a small spot in the corner to wait out as he sat there. Listening to the noise around him, he felt both small and hopeful. The hall smelled of stage lights, fresh paint, and excitement. He could hear the faint sound of someone practicing the piano inside. He closed his eyes for a moment and let himself imagine his hands on those same keys. He knew he was different from the rest. He knew he came from a life where dreams often felt too large and too far away. But he also knew that sometimes a quiet dream can rise higher than anyone expects, and that was enough for him to believe that maybe, just maybe, he belonged on that stage too. The day of the competition arrived with a strange mix of excitement and fear in the boy's heart. He woke up earlier than usual, long before the sun had risen. The house was still quiet, the kind of silence that made every small sound echo. He sat on the edge of his bed for a moment, his hands shaking slightly, reminding himself that this was the day he had dreamed about for so long. Today, he would finally sit in front of a real piano. He got dressed slowly, choosing the cleanest clothes he owned. They were simple, but he made sure they looked neat. His mother had washed them the night before and laid them carefully on a small chair so he would find them easily in the morning. When she woke up and saw him already ready, she smiled softly, understanding the nervous excitement inside him. She walked over and gently fixed the collar of his shirt, telling him he had nothing to worry about and that he should just do his best. He nodded, even though he knew his heart would not calm down that easily. But hearing her words gave him a little strength. After breakfast, he walked toward the community hall with slow steps, trying to keep his breathing steady. He carried nothing in his hands, unlike the other kids who had instruments or costumes with them. But he held something inside him, his hope, his dream, and every lesson he had taught himself through those long nights at home. When he reached the hall, it was already busy. People were coming in and out, some talking loudly, others practicing near the entrance. He saw a girl warming up her voice, singing scales softly as her mother held a water bottle for her. A group of boys carried guitars on their backs, tuning them while laughing among themselves. Another kid rolled a drum in with the help of his father. The air around him felt heavy with excitement. He found an empty chair in the waiting area and sat down quietly. As he looked around, he noticed how confident the other performers seemed. They had practiced on real instruments, trained by teachers, and supported by families who could afford to give them everything they needed. He felt small in comparison, almost invisible. But he reminded himself why he was here. Not to win, not to impress, but to play even if it was just once. A judge came out from behind the stage area, holding a clipboard. His voice carried over the crowd as he called out the names of the first few performers. One by one, kids went inside, and the hall echoed with sounds of music, clapping, and cheering. Each performance brought a different energy, some upbeat, some soft, some funny, and some emotional. The boy waited patiently, his hands resting on his lap. He tapped his fingers lightly against his leg, imagining the feel of real keys under them. Every time the door opened, he tried to catch a glimpse of the stage, the lights, the curtains, the piano sitting proudly at the center. Even from far away, it looked beautiful. A few parents sitting nearby whispered to each other while glancing at him. He heard one of them ask quietly what talent he was performing. When the other parent shrugged, they both gave him a small look of curiosity mixed with doubt. The boy lowered his gaze and focused on his breathing. He knew he didn't look like much of a performer. He knew he didn't have shiny shoes or a polished appearance. But he had a heart full of music, and he hoped it would be enough. As time passed, more contestants finished their performances and walked out, some with big smiles, others with disappointed looks. He watched them all carefully, studying their confidence, their expressions, and how they carried themselves. He admired their courage. At the same time, he felt a tightening in his chest as his turn came closer. Then the moment arrived when one of the organizers walked over to check the next names on the list. She glanced at her clipboard, looked up at him, and asked politely, "Are you ready?" He nodded, even though inside he felt everything but ready. She guided him toward the backstage area, and with each step, his heartbeat grew louder. Behind the curtains, he could hear the end of the performance before him. The audience clapped enthusiastically, cheering the performer on. The boy peeked through a small gap in the curtain. He saw the bright stage lights shining down on the empty bench of the piano. The instrument looked even more impressive up close. It had a smooth wooden frame, polished until it gleamed. The keys were beautifully white and black, resting in perfect rows. He felt drawn to it, like it was calling him. The host walked onto the stage with a microphone in hand, announcing the next performance. The boy heard his own name echo through the hall. A sudden wave of silence washed over him. He could hear the faint murmurs of the crowd, the shuffling of feet, and the tapping of someone's fingers on a chair. It was as if the whole world had come to a stop just for him. He closed his eyes for a moment, drew in a deep breath, and stepped forward. As he walked out, the stage lights seemed brighter than he imagined. They made everything look bigger, the piano, the audience, and the space between him and his dream. He tried to keep his eyes focused on the piano, afraid that if he looked at the crowd too soon, he would lose his nerve. He reached the center of the stage and bowed his head slightly, just like he had seen others do. That's when he heard a soft chuckle coming from somewhere in the audience. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to reach his ears. Then came another faint laugh, and then a few whispers. People were noticing his simple clothes, his nervous steps, the fact that he didn't come with any instrument of his own. Some might have assumed he was in the wrong category, or that he would not last long. He felt a sting in his chest, but he did not let it show. He kept his head down for a second longer, gathering every bit of courage he had. He reminded himself of all those nights he spent practicing on his cardboard piano. He reminded himself of the sound of music that carried him through tough days. He reminded himself of the dream that brought him here. Slowly, he walked toward the piano bench. He ran his fingers gently along the edge of the instrument, feeling its cool surface. It felt real. It felt powerful. It felt like everything he had ever wanted. He sat down, adjusted the bench slightly, and placed his hands on his knees. He could still hear the faint whispers behind him, but he didn't turn around. Instead, he lifted his hands and slowly placed his fingers on the keys. The touch felt strange at first, so different from cardboard, so alive. The hall went quiet. Even the softest breaths seemed to hold still. He took another deep breath, letting the weight of the moment sink in. For the first time in his life, he was sitting in front of a real piano, under real lights, with a real audience waiting. His heart was still racing, but now it raced with hope. This was the moment he had dreamed about, and he was ready to give it everything he had. The hall was silent in a way the boy had never felt before. It was the kind of silence that made every small movement sound louder. As he sat on the piano bench, he could hear the faint rustle of someone shifting in their seat, the small tap of a shoe against the floor, the quiet whisper of air moving through the vents above him. He felt hundreds of eyes watching him, waiting to see what he would do. His hands hovered over the keys, not yet pressing them. The audience probably thought he was too nervous to start. Some may have thought he forgot what he came to play. Others might have believed he didn't know how to play at all. After all, he had walked onto the stage without an instrument, without fancy clothes, and without the confidence the other performers seemed to carry so easily. He took one more quiet breath and placed his fingers gently on the keys, letting the cool surface calm him. In that moment, all the memories of practicing on cardboard keys suddenly returned to him. The nights he stayed awake, tapping lightly on the table, imagining the soft notes. The afternoons he spent listening from outside the community hall, memorizing melodies. The times he watched players through the open door, studying their hands with careful eyes. All those moments were with him now. Then he played the first note. It was soft, so soft that only the people in the front row caught it clearly. But that single note carried something delicate, something honest, something full of feeling. He let it linger for a second before he moved to the next one. This time, the sound traveled deeper into the hall, reaching more ears, catching more attention. He continued slowly, building the melody piece by piece. The tune was simple at first, the kind of melody that felt like a quiet conversation between the heart and the keys. As he played, he no longer heard the whispers or remembered the small chuckles from earlier. All he heard was the piano responding to his touch. Note after note. The audience leaned in without even realizing it. The chuckles stopped completely. The room felt different, now not filled with doubt, but with curiosity, maybe even surprise. People who had judged him moments earlier began to rethink what they believed about him. He let the melody rise gently, adding more motion, more emotion. The song began to open up like a story unfolding in front of them. The soft notes turned warmer, fuller, and more confident. His fingers moved faster, flowing across the keys in a way that didn't match his appearance at all. No one expected that level of control, that sense of timing, or that depth of feeling from a child who had never even owned a proper instrument. A woman in the audience covered, her mouth in shock as the music grew stronger. A man blinked as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Even the judges, who had watched countless performances over the years, leaned closer to get a better look at the boy on the stage. The boy's posture changed as he played. The fear that had held his shoulders tight began to melt away. His back straightened, and his hands grew more confident. He no longer looked like the shy kid who walked nervously toward the piano. He looked like someone who belonged there, someone who had carried music inside him for a very long time. His fingers danced from key to key, guided not by training from a teacher, but by pure heart. He played the way he felt. Every sound that came from the piano carried his hopes, his late-night practices, his dreams of touching a real instrument. He had imagined this moment so many times that now, when it was finally happening, he gave everything he had. The melody shifted again, turning into a soft, emotional wave. It was gentle but deep, the kind of sound that made the audience feel something without knowing why. Some felt warmth in their chest. Others felt the sting of tears forming in their eyes. There was something real about the way he played, something honest that reached people more than any polished performance could. As he continued, the hall remained completely still. No one whispered. No one moved. Even the kids who had laughed earlier now stared with open mouths. They had never seen anything like this. They had underestimated him, just like many people often underestimated quiet children. Kids who didn't speak much, but carried whole worlds inside their minds. Halfway through the performance, the boy closed his eyes for a few seconds, letting his hands guide him. He didn't need to see the keys. He had memorized the pattern long ago. Then the music lifted into a brighter tone, more hopeful, almost like sunlight breaking through clouds. A soft gasp spread through the room. Some people couldn't help it. The shift in the melody was unexpected, beautiful, and full of life. The judges exchanged glances, amazed at the natural expression in his playing. The boy's heart beat in rhythm with each note. For the first time in his life, he felt what it was like to be seen, truly seen. Not as the poor kid from a small home. Not as the boy who practiced on cardboard keys. But as someone who had something inside him that mattered. The piece gradually grew louder, fuller, reaching the most powerful part of the melody. His hands moved with emotion that came from deep within him. Each note felt like a sentence in the story he had been waiting to tell the world. And the world was finally listening. Someone in the back of the hall murmured something, but it wasn't doubt anymore. It was admiration, awe. People began to sit up straighter, as if they didn't want to miss a single moment. When he reached the peak of the song, the notes filled the hall like a bright wave. It wasn't loud in a harsh way. It was strong, powerful, and full of feeling. He played with everything he had, letting the piano become a part of him. And then, gently, he brought the melody back down. The strong notes softened. The bright wave calmed. His fingers slowed their pace, easing the music into something steady and peaceful. The room felt like it was holding its breath. He finished the final soft note with a slight movement of his hand, letting it fade naturally into the air. And then silence. A deep, heavy silence that felt different from the silence at the beginning. This one was full of emotion, full of disbelief, full of respect. People stared at him, unable to speak for a moment. The judges' hands froze above their notepads. Even the host, who usually filled every pause with cheerful words, didn't say anything. It was as if the boy's music had swept through the entire hall and left everyone breathless. He slowly lifted his hands off the keys and placed them on his lap. His heart was racing again, but not from nerves, from the feeling of finally showing the world what he had kept hidden inside him for so long. He didn't know yet what the audience would say. He didn't know if they would clap or stay silent. He didn't know if the judges liked it or not. But for the first time, none of that mattered. All he knew was that he had played the best he could. He had given everything from his heart. And in that moment, sitting on that stage in the quiet glow of the lights, he felt something he had never felt before. He felt proud. For a long moment, the boy sat completely still on the bench, his hands resting quietly on his lap. The hall remained silent, as if no one knew what to do next. It was not the kind of silence that came from boredom or confusion. It was the kind that came when something unexpected touched the heart of a room full of people. The kind that made individuals forget to clap because they were still trying to understand what they just witnessed. The boy kept his eyes lowered, not daring to look up yet. He did not know how people would respond. He only knew that he had played with all the love and hope that had been stored inside him for years. He felt his heart beating fast, each pulse stronger than the last, as if it were telling him that he had done something brave, something meaningful. Then, slowly, the silence broke. Somewhere in the middle of the hall, a single pair of hands began to clap. It was soft at first, like someone testing the sound. Then another pair joined in, this time louder and more confident. Then more. Within a few seconds, the entire hall erupted into applause. The sound grew louder and louder until it filled every corner of the room. People stood from their seats without even thinking, rising to their feet as the applause turned into a standing ovation. The judges stood as well, clapping with wide eyes and expressions that showed genuine surprise. Even the host, who was usually calm and cheerful, seemed almost speechless. The boy lifted his head slowly, his eyes widening as he saw the crowd rising for him. He had never imagined anything like this. He had expected polite applause at most, maybe a few supportive smiles. But this was something far beyond anything he dreamed. The stage lights shone on the faces of the people cheering for him. Mothers wiped their eyes. Fathers nodded in approval. Children stared with awe. For the first time, the boy realized that he had shared something with them, something they would remember. He stood up from the bench shyly and bowed his head again. The applause only grew louder. Some people even whistled or cheered out loud, celebrating the performance they never expected after a long while. The host finally walked onto the stage with a bright expression, though even he seemed at a loss for words. He held the microphone close and said something about the incredible surprise the boy had given the audience. But his voice was almost drowned out by the remaining cheers. The boy stepped away from the piano with slow steps. His hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the overwhelming emotion of the moment. He walked backstage, where he was greeted by a few surprised organizers. They blinked at him, as if trying to understand how such a young boy, dressed so simply, had just played something that moved an entire hall. One of the organizers gently guided him to a quiet spot behind the curtain and asked him to wait there. Contestants who had already performed walked by, some giving him curious looks, others offering shy smiles. A few even nodded at him in admiration. It was strange moments ago. He had been the boy people barely noticed. Now, he felt like the entire room saw him differently. As he stood there, catching his breath, he heard the rest of the event continuing. Performances came and went, each one greeted with applause. But he knew something had shifted. The hall felt different, as if the energy had changed after his performance. He felt overwhelmed yet peaceful at the same time. Time passed, and finally all the performances were finished. The contestants were called to gather on stage for the announcement of the results. The boy walked out again, joining the line of children who stood across the stage. Each of them held a hopeful expression, some smiling nervously, others holding tightly to their instruments. The lights dimmed slightly as the judges took their seats at the table. One of the judges stood up to speak, holding a microphone. He talked about how proud he was of every contestant, how talented and brave they all were. The boy listened quietly, his hands clasped together. Then the judge said something that made the crowd fall silent again. He said that sometimes, very rarely, a performance appears that feels different from the rest, not because of skill alone, but because of heart, honesty, and the story it carries. The boy felt a strange warmth fill his chest. The judge continued speaking, explaining that they had been deeply moved by one performance in particular. He paused for a moment, letting the suspense settle. Then he announced the winner. When the boy heard his name, his breath caught in his throat. The hall erupted into applause again. Some people even cheered louder than before. He stood frozen for a moment, unable to believe it. One of the performers beside him nudged him gently, encouraging him to step forward. He walked toward the front of the stage slowly, still shocked. The host handed him a small trophy and a certificate. The trophy wasn't large or expensive, but to him it felt like the most precious thing he had ever held. It wasn't the trophy itself that mattered. It was what it represented. It was proof that his dream wasn't foolish. Proof that all those nights practicing on cardboard keys meant something. As the crowd clapped for him once again, he looked out at the sea of faces. He saw smiles, admiration, and encouragement. For the first time, he didn't feel invisible. He didn't feel small. He felt like someone who belonged. After the ceremony, many people approached him. Some asked how long he had been playing. Others asked who taught him. Some simply wished him well. He answered quietly, explaining that he learned by listening and practicing with a cardboard piano. At first, people didn't believe him. They looked stunned, almost confused. One woman placed her hand over her heart and said she had never seen such natural talent in her life. A man next to her nodded, saying that the boy's performance had been the most touching moment in the entire event. The boy felt shy with all the attention, but he appreciated every kind word. Deep inside, he still felt like the same kid who sat outside the community hall listening to music through a window. But now, others saw something in him he had only dared to believe in himself. When the crowd finally began to leave, the boy walked outside into the early evening air. The sky was beginning to turn golden, and the warm light touched the buildings softly. His mother was waiting near the entrance, and when she saw him holding the trophy, her eyes filled with tears. She hugged him tightly, whispering that she knew he could do it. She told him how proud she was, her voice trembling with emotion. The boy hugged her back with equal strength, feeling the comfort of her arms around him. As they walked home together, the trophy held carefully in his hands, he felt a new kind of hope growing inside him. A hope that maybe this was just the beginning. Maybe this performance was the first step toward something bigger. He didn't know what the future would bring. He didn't know if he would ever own a real piano or get proper lessons. But he knew one thing for sure. His dream was no longer hidden. It was no longer something he practiced secretly in a kitchen late at night. It was real now, alive and seen. And he was ready to follow wherever it led. The hall felt brighter that morning, as if the walls themselves knew that something important was about to happen. People walked in with quiet excitement, not because they expected anything unusual, but because they had heard whispers about the boy who had surprised everyone days earlier. Some came out of curiosity, some to see if it had all been real, and some simply because they loved moments that felt bigger than life. The boy arrived early. He held his small bag close to his chest as he looked at the stage from a distance. It still felt unreal to him. Days had passed, but the memory of that moment when the audience suddenly fell silent still played in his mind. He didn't know how long that silence had lasted. It was a long pause, but a powerful one. For the first time, people had seen him for who he truly was, not for how he looked or where he came from. He took a seat at the edge of the stage and placed his fingers on the cool wooden floor. He never imagined that a stage would become a place where he felt safe. Normally, the world felt too big, too loud, and too quick to judge. But here, in this place, he felt like he had something to give. A gentle voice called his name. It was the old caretaker, the one person who had always smiled at him without asking any questions. The caretaker walked over and sat beside him. "You changed something in this place," the caretaker said. "People are looking at you differently now. Not because they pity you, not because they doubt you, but because they finally see you." The boy didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to praise, and he wasn't sure how to accept it. He simply nodded. "You want to practice before the show?" the caretaker asked. He nodded again. Words didn't always feel necessary between them. The caretaker stood up and dusted off his hands. "Go on, then. I'll open the curtains for you." The boy walked to the piano set at the center of the stage, the same one he had played earlier. Its smooth surface felt familiar now. He placed his hands on the keys and closed his eyes. He started with slow notes. They floated through the empty hall like soft echoes. His hands moved easily, as if guided by something deep inside him. The music grew fuller, stronger, and the hall carried it gently. The caretaker stood quietly at the side, listening as if witnessing something pure. When the boy finished, he opened his eyes and sighed. Not out of sadness, but out of release. Each time he played, it felt like he shared a part of himself the world never knew existed. Later, as people slowly filled the hall, he waited backstage. His heart beat faster than usual, but this time he didn't feel small. He didn't feel out of place. He felt ready. The announcer stepped forward and spoke into the microphone, introducing the performances one by one. The boy listened as each act went on. There were singers, dancers, and groups of students showing their skills. The audience clapped politely each time. Then the announcer paused. Our next performer is someone who impressed us all with a surprising and heartfelt performance earlier this week. Today, he is here again to share his music with all of you. The boy stepped out. It happened again. People whispered. Some leaned forward. Some raised their eyebrows. And a few smiled, remembering the moment that had changed everything. He walked with steady steps. No rush, no fear. He sat down at the piano and breathed in slowly. His hands hovered over the keys for a moment as the hall fell completely silent. He didn't need to look at the audience. He didn't need to think about what they expected. He just played. The first notes were gentle, like a soft breeze. Then came the rise, smooth and steady, followed by warm waves of sound that wrapped the room. The audience didn't blink. They didn't move. They didn't even think about laughing. The piece grew stronger. His fingers moved faster, each key ringing clear and full. It was not a song anyone recognized. It was something he created, something that had grown inside him over years of quiet practice. Waves of emotion carried through the hall, moments that felt hopeful, moments that felt heavy, and moments that felt bright. Some people in the audience had tears in their eyes without even knowing why. It wasn't sadness. It was the feeling of being touched by something honest. The boy played with his whole heart. Each note felt like a small piece of his story. His struggles, his long nights, his lonely hours, his dream of being seen. Everything flowed out into the hall. When he finished, he lifted his hands slowly from the keys. Silence. A long, deep silence. And then applause. Not light applause. Not polite applause. A roar. The entire hall stood. People clapped. Some whistled. Some shouted his name. The floor shook slightly from the energy. The boy blinked, unsure how to react. He had never been in the center of such emotion before. He stood up slowly and bowed his head. The applause only grew louder. At that moment, something inside him changed. All his life, he had carried the weight of people underestimating him. But now, he felt something new, a sense that he belonged. A sense that he mattered. A sense that his talent had the power to reach people in ways he never imagined. After the show, many people came to him backstage. They thanked him, praised him, and told him how his music made them feel. He smiled awkwardly, still not used to the attention, but grateful for it. One man from a local music school approached him. "You have something rare," the man said. "If you're willing, we can help you grow it. We can offer you lessons, support, and a chance to perform in more places. You deserve it." The boy looked up, his eyes wide. No one had ever offered him anything like that. Not once. He didn't know what to say at first. But the caretaker, who stood quietly behind him, placed a hand on his shoulder. "Say yes." The caretaker whispered. The boy nodded. That day marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life. A chapter where he was not just the poor kid people teased or overlooked. He became the boy who could move an entire room with a piano. He became someone people believed in. As the hall cleared and the lights dimmed, he walked to the piano one more time and placed his hand gently on its surface. This was only the beginning. The world outside still had its challenges. Life would not suddenly become easy. But he now carried something powerful: confidence, hope, and the knowledge that he could rise above anything. He walked out of the hall that day with a steady heart. The audience had once chuckled when they saw him, but now they stood for him, and they would never forget him.